The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. I parked my modest sedan in the driveway of my neatly kept home. From the outside, everything appeared idyllic, a small but well-tended garden adorned with vibrant flowers, wind chimes softly tinkling in the breeze, and Max, my golden retriever, lounging lazily on the porch. It was a picture of tranquility, a life that many would envy. Inside, Kala stood at the kitchen counter, humming a tune while preparing dinner. The aroma of spices and roasted vegetables filled the air, a testament to her culinary talent. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled as I entered the room. Her smile was warm, radiant even, but I couldn't help but feel a faint undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Our relationship had always seemed perfect to outsiders. I, a dedicated software engineer with a penchant for problem-solving, and Kala, an aspiring artist whose canvases were a kaleidoscope of emotions, had met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's gallery opening. It had been a serendipitous encounter. I was captivated by her fiery red hair and infectious laughter, while she admired my quiet confidence and thoughtful demeanor. Our courtship was a whirlwind of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and spontaneous adventures. We had built our life together on what seemed like an unshakable foundation of mutual respect and love. Yet, even the strongest foundations could harbor unseen cracks. As we sat down for dinner, my mind wandered to the early days of our relationship. I recalled the long walks along the beach, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her art, and the comfort of our shared silences. But lately, those silences had grown heavier, filled with unspoken words and lingering tension. "You seem distant tonight," Kala observed, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but carried an edge of concern. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Just a lot on my mind," I replied, my tone neutral. "Work has been demanding, and well, I guess I'm just tired." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Maybe you need a break," she suggested. "We could plan a weekend getaway, just the two of us." I smiled faintly at the suggestion. "That sounds nice," I said, though the idea felt like a temporary escape from something more profound. After dinner, I retreated to my home office, seeking solace in the familiar glow of my computer screen. I had always been meticulous, finding comfort in structure and routine. But tonight, even my work couldn't provide the usual distraction. My thoughts kept drifting back to Kala, her recent late nights, the mysterious phone calls, and the sudden shift in her demeanor. It wasn't like me to doubt her, but something felt off, like a faint hum of dissonance in an otherwise harmonious melody. Meanwhile, Kala stood in front of her easel, her brush gliding over the canvas with practiced ease. Her art had always been her refuge, a place where she could express her innermost thoughts without words. Tonight, her strokes were bold and chaotic, a stark contrast to her usual style. She paused, her gaze distant, as though lost in a world only she could see. Max padded over and rested his head on my lap, breaking my train of thought. I scratched behind his ears, finding a small measure of comfort in his unwavering loyalty. "At least you're always honest with me, buddy," I muttered, a wry smile tugging at the corners of my lips. The evening wore on, and I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Each image told a story: a hiking trip to the mountains, a cozy winter evening by the fireplace, a candid shot of Kala laughing at one of my jokes. We had shared so much, and yet the distance between us now felt insurmountable. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Kala slept soundly beside me. Her face was serene, her breathing even, but my mind raced with unanswered questions. Was I overthinking? Was this just a phase, a rough patch we would eventually overcome? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The calm of our life was deceptive, like the stillness before a storm. I knew that storms, once unleashed, had the power to reshape everything in their path. For now, all I could do was brace myself and hope that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, just as we always had. Little did I know, the storm was already brewing, and its first whispers would come sooner than I could have anticipated. The day began like any other, with the sun streaming through the bedroom window and the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen. But that morning, something felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the air carried a heaviness I couldn't ignore. Kala had left early, claiming she had errands to run before heading to her art studio. I shrugged it off at first, pouring myself a cup of coffee and settling into my usual morning routine. But as the hours ticked by, unease gnawed at me. Her absences had become more frequent, her explanations increasingly vague. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into her behavior. After all, relationships had their ebbs and flows, didn't they? That fragile reassurance shattered when I noticed her laptop sitting on the dining table. Kala was usually meticulous about her belongings, and it was unlike her to leave something so personal unattended. Curiosity and dread wrestled within me as I approached the device. I told myself I shouldn't invade her privacy, but my gut told me otherwise. Something was wrong, and I needed answers. With trembling hands, I opened the laptop and was met with a flurry of notifications. Most of them were mundane: emails, calendar reminders, social media updates. But one notification stood out, a message from someone named Elliot. The preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My heart plummeted. I stared at the screen, my mind racing to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the message, and what I found confirmed my worst fears. The chat history between Kala and Elliot was a trail of secrets, a web of deceit that unraveled before me. Flirtatious messages, plans for clandestine meetings, and even photos that left no room for doubt. My chest tightened as anger and betrayal coursed through me. Every word, every image felt like a dagger, each one cutting deeper than the last. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, but I was too stunned to move. Instead, I sank into the nearest chair, trying to process the enormity of what I had just discovered. When Kala returned that evening, I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way. She greeted me with her usual cheerful demeanor, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I waited until after dinner, when the house was quiet, to bring it up. "I found your messages," I said, my voice cold and steady. Her smile faltered, and for a brief moment, panic flashed in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Don't play dumb, Kala." "Elliot. The messages. The photos. I know everything." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "And what if you do? What are you going to do about it?" Her defiance caught me off guard. I had expected guilt, apologies, maybe even tears. But there was none of that. Instead, she looked at me as if I were the one at fault, as if my discovery had somehow inconvenienced her. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Does it matter?" she shot back. "We've been drifting apart for months, James. You've been so caught up in your work, in your routines, that you didn't even notice." Her words stung, but they didn't excuse her actions. "That doesn't give you the right to betray me," I retorted. "If you were unhappy, you should have told me. We could have worked through it, or at least ended things honestly. But instead you chose this." She shrugged, her indifference infuriating. "Maybe I didn't want to hurt your feelings. Or maybe I just needed something you couldn't give me." The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating and inescapable. I stood there, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. The woman I had loved and trusted was now a stranger, her true self laid bare. "You need to leave," she said suddenly, her tone firm and final. "This house doesn't feel like ours anymore. It's mine now, and I think it's best if you go." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. "You're kicking me out? This house is as much mine as it is yours." "Maybe legally," she conceded. "But emotionally? You've been checked out for a long time, James. I've made my decision." It felt like the final blow, the last nail in the coffin of our relationship. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, my mind numb and my heart shattered. I ended up at my friend Mark's place, a small but cozy apartment that now felt like a lifeline. Mark didn't ask many questions. He simply offered me a place to stay and a cold beer, understanding that I wasn't ready to talk. That night, lying on his lumpy couch, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few hours. The betrayal, the confrontation, her unapologetic demeanor, it all felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I knew my life had changed irrevocably, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. But one thing was clear, I couldn't let this break me. I had to face the reality of my situation and find a way to move forward. The illusion of our perfect life was gone, shattered beyond repair. All that remained was the truth, raw and unyielding, demanding to be confronted. I sat at Mark's kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee. The bitterness mirrored the turmoil inside me, a constant reminder of the events that had brought me here. Mark sat across from me, his gaze steady but concerned. "You can't let her win," he said, his voice firm. "That's your house. Legally, you have every right to be there." His words stirred something in me, a flicker of determination. He was right. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, everything I thought we had built together. I couldn't let Kala's betrayal strip me of that. The next morning, armed with my resolve and the deed to the house, I headed back. The drive felt surreal, a mixture of dread and anticipation weighing heavy on my chest. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Kala's car parked haphazardly, as if she hadn't expected me to return so soon. I let myself in with my key, the familiar creak of the door sounding more ominous than usual. The house felt different, its warmth replaced by a cold, hollow silence. Kala was in the living room, her feet tucked under her on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, startled, when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "This is my house," I replied evenly. "And I'm not going anywhere." She stood, her posture defensive. "You've made your point. You're upset, but this..." She gestured around the room. "This isn't going to work anymore. It's over, James. Just let it go." "You don't get to make that call," I shot back. "You've already taken enough from me. I'm not giving up my home." The tension was palpable, a fragile thread stretched to its limit. Kala's defiance faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Fine," she said coolly. "Then we'll see what the police have to say about it." Her threat hung in the air, but I wasn't intimidated. "Call them," I said, my voice steady. "I've got nothing to hide." She hesitated, clearly not expecting my response. Instead of calling, she stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there for a moment, the silence that followed almost deafening. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful battle, but I wasn't about to back down. Later that day, I reached out to a lawyer, explaining the situation in detail. The legalities were clear, the house was mine, and Kala had no grounds to claim otherwise. With the lawyer's advice, I filed a formal notice to assert my rights and reclaim full possession of the property. Returning to the house felt like entering enemy territory. Kala's demeanor had shifted. She was colder, more calculating. She'd taken to locking herself in the bedroom or disappearing for hours without explanation. I avoided confrontation when I could, but the tension was always there, an unspoken battle waging between us. One evening, as I sorted through paperwork in the office, I found something that made my blood run cold, a stack of unpaid bills and overdue notices, all addressed to Kala. Credit cards, utilities, even loans I hadn't known about. She'd been spiraling financially, and I had been oblivious. The discovery fueled my resolve. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. The next confrontation was inevitable. "Kala, we need to talk," I said firmly as she walked into the kitchen the following morning. She rolled her eyes. "What now?" I placed the bills on the table between us. "Care to explain this?" Her face hardened. "That's none of your business." "It's very much my business," I retorted. You've been living beyond your means and dragging me into your mess. This stops now. And what are you going to do about it? She challenged, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I've already done it, I said. I've filed for a separation of finances. From now on, you're on your own. Her eyes widened, the weight of my words sinking in. You're serious. Dead serious, I replied. This is my life, and I'm taking it back. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and tense interactions. Kala's bravado began to crumble as the reality of her situation set in. I enlisted the help of the authorities to enforce my right to the property, and within weeks, Kala was legally obligated to vacate the premises. The day she left was bittersweet. As her car disappeared down the street, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had left chaos in her wake. But as I stood in the now quiet house, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my turning point, the moment I chose to reclaim my life and move forward, no matter how painful the process. I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would rebuild it on my own terms. The house felt eerily empty after Kala left. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension, no lingering hostility. Just silence. As I stood in the middle of the living room, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The storm had passed, but the wreckage remained, and it was up to me to piece everything back together. I spent the first few days cleaning and reorganizing the house. It was cathartic, in a way, a physical manifestation of reclaiming my space and my life. I packed away anything that reminded me of Kala, shoving boxes of memories into the attic. It wasn't about erasing the past but about making room for a future where I could breathe freely again. As I sorted through drawers and closets, I discovered more than just old photos and forgotten trinkets. Buried in a stack of papers was a credit card statement showing purchases I'd never made. Spa treatments, designer clothes, and even plane tickets. My heart sank as I realized the full extent of her deception. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, she'd been siphoning money from our joint account to fund her lifestyle. Instead of letting anger consume me, I saw this as an opportunity to set things right. I reached out to my lawyer, determined to protect what was left of my assets. The divorce process had already begun, but now I had more ammunition. With clear evidence of Kala's financial mismanagement, I filed for a formal division of assets, ensuring that she couldn't take more than she deserved. Taking control wasn't just about the legal battles, though. It was about reclaiming my identity, my purpose. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with, people who'd been there long before Kala entered my life. Mark, of course, was my anchor through it all, but reconnecting with others reminded me of the support system I had neglected. One evening, as I sifted through yet another pile of paperwork, I found an old business proposal I'd drafted years ago. It was for a side hustle, a small woodworking business I'd dreamed of starting but had shelved when life got too busy. Holding those yellowed pages in my hands, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was time to revisit that dream. The next day, I cleared out the garage and set up a makeshift workshop. The rhythmic sound of saws and sanders filled the space, a soothing contrast to the chaos that had once dominated my days. Creating something tangible, something entirely my own, was therapeutic. Slowly but surely, the workshop became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy and rebuild not just furniture but my sense of self. As the weeks turned into months, the house began to transform. The walls, once adorned with Kala's abstract paintings, now displayed framed photos of my travels, my family, and the friends who'd stood by me. The sterile, minimalist decor gave way to warm, inviting spaces filled with rich woods and vibrant textiles. Each change reflected a piece of who I was, who I'd always been but had somehow lost along the way. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings moved forward. Kala's attempts to contest the division of assets fell flat, her arguments dismantled by the evidence my lawyer had meticulously gathered. The judge's ruling was clear: the house was mine, and she was entitled to only a fraction of what she'd hoped to claim. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about standing up for myself after being walked over for far too long. With the financial and legal battles largely behind me, I focused on building a future I could be proud of. The woodworking side business began to gain traction, thanks in part to Mark's relentless encouragement and his knack for social media marketing. Orders trickled in at first, then steadily grew as word spread about my handcrafted pieces. Each completed project felt like a small victory, proof that I could turn my passion into something meaningful. Of course, there were tough days, moments when the loneliness crept in, when the weight of everything threatened to pull me under. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. I learned to embrace the quiet, to find strength in solitude rather than fear it. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, carving out a life on my own terms. One Saturday, as I stood in the kitchen sanding the edges of a wooden cutting board, the doorbell rang. It was Emily, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She'd heard about what happened through mutual friends and had come to check in. Over coffee, we talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily. By the time she left, I felt lighter, as if a missing piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Rebuilding wasn't just about reclaiming the house or starting a business. It was about reconnecting, with friends, with dreams, with myself. The more I let people back into my life, the more I realized how much I'd isolated myself during my years with Kala. Now, each connection felt like a bridge to a brighter, more fulfilling future. The final step in taking control was letting go of the bitterness. Kala had made her choices, and I'd made mine. Holding on to anger would only hold me back, and I refused to let her have that power over me. So, I forgave her, not for her sake but for mine. It was a quiet, private moment, but it marked a turning point. The weight lifted, and I felt truly free for the first time in years. The house was no longer just a house, it was a home, a reflection of my journey and my resilience. Each piece of furniture, each carefully chosen decoration, told a story of triumph over adversity. I had taken control, not just of the physical space but of my life, my happiness, and my future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood outside the courthouse, the official papers in my hand. It wasn't the moment of vindication I had imagined. It felt more like quiet closure, the kind that marks the end of one story and the beginning of another. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. It was time to move forward. Back at the house, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. Every corner of this place carried a memory, some painful, some bittersweet, but all a testament to how far I'd come. The renovations were almost complete, each change representing a step toward reclaiming my life. Gone were the cold, impersonal touches Kala had insisted on. In their place were warm woods, cozy rugs, and vibrant plants that brought the space to life. One of my proudest achievements was the transformation of the garden. What had once been an overgrown patch of weeds was now a thriving oasis. Mark and a few other friends had pitched in on weekends, helping me clear the debris and plant new life. It became a space not just for relaxation but for celebration, a symbol of growth and renewal. The woodworking business had taken off more than I could have hoped. Orders poured in, not just from locals but from people across the country who had discovered my work online. Each piece I crafted felt like a small victory, a tangible reminder that I was capable of building something lasting and meaningful. I even started teaching weekend workshops, sharing my skills with others and fostering a sense of community. Reconnecting with old friends had been one of the most rewarding parts of this journey. They reminded me of the man I'd been before Kala, the man I still was, beneath the layers of hurt and betrayal. Mark, of course, remained my steadfast supporter, but others had returned to my life as well. Emily, in particular, had become a regular presence, her warmth and humor a welcome contrast to the heaviness of the past year. One evening, as I sat on the newly built deck overlooking the garden, Emily joined me. She brought over a bottle of wine, and we talked for hours, the conversation ranging from silly anecdotes to deeper reflections. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I couldn't quite name, a tentative hope, a flicker of possibility. But the most significant moment of triumph came during a gathering I hosted at the house. It was a crisp autumn evening, the garden strung with fairy lights that cast a warm glow over the scene. Friends filled the space, their laughter and chatter a soundtrack to the new life I was building. Mark manned the grill, flipping burgers with exaggerated flair, while Emily set out trays of appetizers. At one point, I stepped back to take it all in. This was my home, my sanctuary, and it was alive with the energy of people who cared about me. It wasn't just a celebration of the house or the business. It was a celebration of resilience, of finding strength in the face of adversity and emerging stronger on the other side. Emily found me standing off to the side and nudged me playfully. "Deep in thought?" she asked, her eyes sparkling in the light. "Just taking it all in," I replied with a smile. "It's been a long road to get here." She nodded, her expression softening. "You've done an amazing job, James. You should be proud." "I am," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the battles, they had all been necessary steps in finding my way back to myself. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was finally living it on my own terms. The evening ended with a toast. Mark raised his glass, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "To James," he said, "for proving that no matter how hard life hits, you can always get back up." The group echoed the sentiment, their glasses clinking together in a symphony of support. I looked around at the faces of my friends, my chosen family, and felt a swell of gratitude. This was what mattered. This was home. As I lay in bed that night, the house quiet once more, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what it might hold. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready. And so, with the past firmly behind me and a world of possibilities ahead, I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.